At my graduation party, my mom raised her glass and said, "Let's toast to the child who actually made us proud," while staring straight at my sister. I was the one who paid for everything. I just nodded, excused myself, and transferred the house back into my name while they were still cutting the cake. Now my mom is panicking, but this is just the beginning. I, 32M, stood in the corner of my own graduation party, watching my mother raise her champagne glass with that practiced smile she'd perfected over 3 decades. The words came out smooth as silk, delivered to a room full of relatives and family friends I'd personally invited and paid to host. "Let's toast to the child who actually made us proud." Her eyes locked onto my sister across the room. Not a glance in my direction. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement that I existed, let alone that I was the one who'd just earned my master's degree in architecture after working full-time for 6 years to pay for it myself. The same degree my parents had told me was a waste of time when I'd announced my plans to pursue it. I felt something inside me go completely still. Not angry, not hurt, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a storm. My sister basked in the attention like she always did, soaking up praise for her recent promotion to associate at her law firm, a position she'd landed through my uncle's connections, at a firm where she billed 80 hours a week but somehow never seemed to actually work. She raised her glass back to Mom, and they shared this moment of mutual admiration that I'd witnessed 1,000 times before in 1,000 different variations. Nobody seemed to notice that the actual graduate was checking his phone in the corner. I pulled up my banking app and navigated to the real estate holdings section. 3 months ago, in a moment of what I now recognized as spectacular stupidity, I transferred the deed of my house into my mother's name for tax purposes. She'd convinced me it would help with some estate planning, that it was just paperwork, that nothing would actually change. I trusted her because despite everything, despite years of being second choice, I'd still wanted to believe my mother had my best interests at heart. The transfer reversal form was already filled out. I'd prepared it weeks ago after overhearing Mom tell my aunt that she was planning to sell my house and split the proceeds with my sister as a nest egg for her future. She'd actually laughed about how I didn't need to know since I was just renting from her anyway in her mind. I clicked submit. The digital signature processed. Within 48 hours, the house would be back in my name, and the temporary transfer would be nullified due to the clause I'd had my lawyer insert about reversal rights within 6 months. I excused myself from my own party with a polite nod that nobody returned. I walked out the front door of my house, I reminded myself, and drove to my office downtown. I had work to do. The next 72 hours were a blur of phone calls, document signatures, and cold calculation. I'd spent 6 years building my architectural firm from nothing, working 16-hour days while attending graduate school at night. I designed custom homes for wealthy clients who paid premium rates, and I'd been smart with every dollar. My sister didn't know this, and neither did my parents, but I was worth just over $2 million in liquid assets, not counting the firm's value or my property holdings. They'd always assumed I was struggling. I'd let them assume it. When you grow up watching your parents celebrate your siblings' every minor achievement while dismissing your major ones, you learn to keep your wins quiet. Monday morning, I received confirmation that the house was legally mine again. I immediately called a property management company and instructed them to change every lock on the property. Then I called my lawyer. I explained what I needed. She'd been my attorney for 4 years and had witnessed enough of my family dynamics to not even question my decisions. She just took notes and told me she'd have everything ready by end of business Tuesday. My phone started ringing Monday afternoon. Mom's name flashed on the screen 15 times before she finally left a voicemail. Her voice was strained, barely containing panic. She tried to access the online property portal to list my house with a realtor. Her realtor, apparently this had been planned for weeks, and discovered she no longer had ownership access. She wanted to know what was going on. She demanded I call her back immediately. I didn't. Tuesday evening, my parents showed up at my office. The receptionist called back to warn me, and I told her to send them up. They walked into my corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, taking in the expensive furniture and the architectural models of multi-million-dollar projects, and I watched my mother's face as she recalculated everything she thought she knew about my life. Dad asked what was happening with the house. His tone was careful, like he already suspected he wasn't going to like my answer, but was hoping for some reasonable explanation that would make this all go away. I leaned back in my leather chair and explained calmly that I'd reversed the transfer. The house was mine again. It had always been mine, really, but now it was mine legally again too. I mentioned that I discovered her plans to sell it and that I decided I didn't appreciate my property being used as a bargaining chip in whatever game she was playing with my sister's future. Mom's face went red. She started in on this speech about family obligations and how ungrateful I was, and how she'd only been trying to help secure my sister's future since I was already established and didn't need the money. She actually said that, didn't need the money, while standing in an office I'd built from nothing without a single dollar of help from either of them. I let her finish. Then I asked her a simple question. Did she remember my undergraduate graduation? The one 8 years ago where she'd spent the entire ceremony on her phone coordinating my sister's law school apartment hunt? Did she remember my first major architectural award, when I'd called to tell her I'd won, and she'd cut me off after 30 seconds because my sister needed help picking a dress for some law firm mixer? She went quiet. I continued. I brought up instance after instance, year after year of being overlooked, dismissed, treated like the backup child who existed solely to support the real star of the family. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even particularly emotional about it. I was just stating facts, cataloging years of data like I was presenting a project timeline to a client. Dad tried to interrupt with some weak deflection about how I was misremembering things, but I cut him off. I told him I wasn't interested in rewriting history or pretending this was all some misunderstanding. I just wanted them to understand that I was done participating in the family dynamic they'd created. Then I told them about the trust fund. This was the part I'd been saving, the part that was going to hurt. My grandmother, Dad's mother, had passed away 2 years ago. She'd left a substantial trust fund to be divided among her grandchildren. My parents had been the executors. They'd told me the money was being held in probate and would be distributed eventually, probably another year or two with all the legal complications. They'd lied. The money had been distributed 18 months ago. My sister had received her portion immediately, $250,000 that she'd used as a down payment on a luxury condo downtown. I'd received nothing. When I'd asked my grandmother's estate attorney about it last week, she'd seemed confused and checked her records. Then she told me something interesting. My parents had filed paperwork claiming I'd already received my portion as an advance years earlier for education expenses. They'd forged my signature on documents stating I'd acknowledged receipt of funds and waived my right to any additional inheritance. I had copies of these documents in a folder on my desk. I slid them across to my parents and watched my father's face go gray. I informed them that I'd already reported the fraud to both the estate attorney and the police. I'd filed a lawsuit to recover my inheritance plus damages. And I'd made sure my sister's attorney employer knew that she might be called to testify in a case involving forged legal documents, since her name appeared as a witness on several of the fraudulent forms. Mom collapsed into the chair across from me. Dad just stood there, frozen. I told them I wanted them out of my office. I was done with this conversation and done with them. They could communicate with me through my attorney going forward. Dad tried one last appeal to family loyalty, to forgiveness, to not destroying the family over money. He actually used that phrase, over money, as if the money was the problem and not the decades of favoritism and the recent months of actual criminal fraud. I stood up and walked to my office door, holding it open. I waited until they shuffled out, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them, before closing it behind them. Update 1. That was 3 weeks ago. The situation has escalated in ways I didn't fully anticipate, though maybe I should have. My sister called me 6 days after the office confrontation. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She was crying, which was novel. I'd rarely seen her show genuine emotion about anything that didn't directly benefit her. She told me her firm had placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation into the forged documents. Apparently, witnessing and signing legal paperwork attesting to facts you know are false is a serious ethics violation, even if it's for family. Her supervising partner had called her in and explained that while the firm wasn't firing her yet, they couldn't have an associate under investigation for document fraud actively working on cases. She wanted to know why I was doing this to her. She kept insisting she didn't know the documents were fraudulent, that Mom had told her I'd actually received the money, and these were just formalities. She claimed she'd just signed where Mom told her to sign because she trusted our mother. I listened to the whole speech. Then I asked her about my graduation party, the toast, whether she'd thought that was strange or cruel or worth maybe pulling Mom aside to question why she was deliberately humiliating me at my own celebration. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she admitted she hadn't really thought about it at all. It had just seemed like typical mom behavior, favoring her as usual, and she'd been too caught up in enjoying the attention to consider how it might feel from my perspective. At least she was honest about that. I told her I didn't believe for a second that she didn't know the documents were fraudulent. She was a lawyer. She knew what witnessing legal documents meant. She'd made a choice to participate in defrauding me because it benefited her, and now she was experiencing consequences for that choice. I told her this wasn't personal, it was just accountability. Then I hung up. The lawsuit moved faster than expected. My grandmother's estate attorney was horrified by the fraud and fully cooperated with my legal team. She provided documentation showing that my parents had explicitly instructed her to distribute my sister's portion immediately while holding mine back, and that she'd questioned this decision but had been told I'd requested the delay myself in writing. Except I hadn't. And the email she'd received from my address had actually come from my mother's computer. My IT forensics expert confirmed this through metadata analysis that showed the IP address matched my parents' home network. The criminal investigation was moving forward too. The detective assigned to the case called me in for an interview where I walked him through everything. He seemed genuinely angry on my behalf, which was validating in a way I hadn't expected. He told me this kind of familial fraud was more common than people realized, but rarely prosecuted because victims usually didn't want to press charges against family members. I told him I had no such hesitation. My parents hired a lawyer, which cleaned out most of their savings. They'd already been living beyond their means for years. I discovered through some digging that they'd taken out a second mortgage on their house to fund my sister's lifestyle and had significant credit card debt. They'd been counting on selling my house to dig themselves out of the hole. Their attorney reached out to mine with a settlement offer. They'd pay back the $250,000 plus interest if I dropped the criminal charges and the civil suit. They'd also transfer back any remaining inheritance funds they'd hidden. My lawyer asked what I wanted to do. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. Then I told her to counteroffer. I wanted the full inheritance amount plus $200,000 in damages for fraud and emotional distress. I wanted a formal written apology acknowledging exactly what they'd done and why it was wrong. I wanted them to sign an agreement that they would have no contact with me for a minimum of 5 years unless I initiated it. And I wanted my sister to cooperate fully with the investigation and provide a sworn statement admitting her knowledge and participation in the fraud. No criminal charges would be dropped, but I'd agree not to pursue additional civil remedies beyond the settlement amount. My lawyer called it scorched earth. I called it fair. They had 48 hours to respond. Update 2. They accepted my terms. Or rather, they had no choice but to accept them. The settlement documents arrived 6 days ago. Everything was in order. The full inheritance amount, the damages, a formal apology that their attorney had clearly written but that my parents had to sign anyway. My sister's sworn statement was attached, and reading it was somehow more satisfying than I'd expected. She admitted everything. That Mom had explicitly told her the documents were to prevent me from claiming inheritance money that they felt should go primarily to her since she had more expenses and better prospects. That she'd understood this was legally questionable, but had convinced herself it was a family matter, not a legal one. That she'd signed the documents as a witness knowing she was attesting to false information. The statement ended with a paragraph about how she understood her actions were wrong and took full responsibility. Her attorney had probably insisted on that language to help her case with her firm, but it didn't matter. It was in writing, notarized, and legally binding. I received a cashier's check for $450,000. I deposited it the same day. The formal apology was 2 pages long, single-spaced. It detailed every instance of favoritism, every dismissal of my achievements, every way they'd prioritized my sister over me throughout our lives. It acknowledged the toast at my graduation party specifically, naming it as cruel and calculated to diminish my accomplishment. It admitted the fraud was premeditated and motivated by a belief that my sister deserved more because they valued her success more than mine. Reading it felt like vindication and grief mixed together. These were things I'd always known but had never been validated. Seeing them in writing, signed by both parents, made something in my chest loosen that I hadn't realized was clenched. I scanned the apology and sent it to every family member who'd been at that graduation party. No explanation, just the PDF attachment with a subject line that read, "Context you might find interesting." My phone exploded with messages over the next 48 hours. Aunts and uncles who'd always treated me like the forgettable nephew suddenly wanted to talk about how they'd always suspected something was off. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years were messaging to say they were sorry and they hadn't realized how bad it was. Even my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt who'd always been kind to me, called crying, saying she wished she'd known because she would have said something. The family group chat that my parents had dominated for years went silent. Then my uncle, Dad's brother, posted a single message saying he thought everyone needed to reevaluate some things, and maybe the family dynamic had been unhealthy for a long time. Several relatives removed my parents from the chat entirely. My sister posted her own message in the family chat, something carefully worded about taking responsibility for her mistakes and working to be better. It read like a PR statement, which it probably was. Nobody responded to it. The professional consequences for her kept mounting. Her firm decided not to renew her associate position after her current term ended. They weren't technically firing her, but everyone understood what it meant. She'd have to find another firm willing to take her with an ethics investigation on her record, and in the legal community, that reputation followed you. I heard through the family grapevine that she'd moved back in with our parents. The luxury condo she'd bought with the inheritance money was being quietly listed for sale. Apparently, she couldn't afford the mortgage and HOA fees without her full associate salary. My parents' house went up for sale too. They needed to liquidate assets to pay the settlement, and between the second mortgage and their debt, they'd be lucky to break even. I heard they were planning to downsize to a small rental across town. Part of me waited to feel guilty about all this. I kept expecting some moment of regret, some impulse to call everything off and forgive them, because family is supposed to forgive. It never came. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. I'd spent 3 decades trying to earn approval from people who decided before I was even old enough to understand what was happening that I would always be second place. I'd twisted myself into knots trying to be good enough, successful enough, accomplished enough to finally get the recognition I watched them pour over my sister for doing the bare minimum. And now I was free of it. Not because they'd changed or apologized in any meaningful way. The written apology was legally mandated, not heartfelt, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for them to see me. I'd made them see consequences instead, which turned out to be much more satisfying. My firm landed its biggest contract 2 weeks ago, a $15 million mixed-use development project downtown. The client specifically requested me based on my previous work and reputation. I signed the contract in my office, alone, with no one to tell and no one to celebrate with. It felt perfect. Final update. I'm writing this final update from my new office. I expanded the firm 3 months after the settlement, bringing on 2 junior architects and a full administrative staff. We moved to a larger space with views of the river and enough room to grow into. Business has been exceptional. Apparently word got around about my work, and suddenly clients who'd never heard of me were requesting consultations. The criminal charges against my parents resulted in a plea deal. They pled guilty to fraud and forgery, received suspended sentences with probation, and were ordered to complete community service. They avoided jail time, which their attorney presented as a victory, but they now have criminal records that will follow them for life. My sister never recovered professionally. She ended up leaving law entirely and took a job doing compliance work for a mid-sized corporation. It pays less than half what she made as an associate, and she has to explain the ethics investigation in every interview. The last I heard, she was still living with our parents in their rental, all 3 of them crammed into a small 2-bedroom apartment, splitting expenses. The family mostly fractured. Some relatives took my parents' side, claiming I'd gone too far and destroyed the family over pride. But more took mine, or at least stepped back from my parents and sister entirely. Holidays are apparently awkward now, with people having to navigate who they can invite without creating drama. I haven't been to a family holiday in 8 months. I don't miss it. I did get one unexpected message about 6 months after everything settled. It was from my father, sent from a new email address since I'd blocked all their previous contact methods. He kept it short. He said he'd been going to therapy, court-mandated, but still, and his therapist had helped him realize some things about how he'd treated me throughout my life. He said he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again, but he wanted me to know he was genuinely sorry for all of it. He didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. He just said he was sorry and hoped I was doing well. I read it 3 times. Then I saved it to a folder and didn't respond. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have that conversation. Maybe I won't. Either way, it's my choice now, on my terms, if and when I'm ready. That's the difference between now and before. I'm not waiting for their approval or their love or their acknowledgement anymore. I'm just living my life, building my career, and choosing who gets to be part of my world. Last week, I bought a second property, a small cabin in the mountains about 2 hours from the city. It's peaceful there, quiet. I spend weekends designing and sketching and hiking trails where nobody knows who I am or what my family did or didn't do. I'm planning to ask out the woman who runs the coffee shop in the mountain town. She knows I'm an architect who comes up on weekends, and that's all she knows about me. And that's exactly how I want it. A fresh start with someone who has no context for all the family drama, who'll judge me entirely on who I am now rather than who I was in a family that never valued me. This whole experience taught me something important. You don't owe people access to your life just because you share DNA. You don't owe them forgiveness just because they're family. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away completely and build something new with people who actually appreciate you. My mother called from a restricted number last month. I answered by accident, not realizing who it was. She asked if we could talk, if enough time had passed, if I was ready to consider letting them back into my life. She said my sister missed me and my father was struggling with the estrangement. I asked her if she remembered what she'd toasted at my graduation party. There was a long silence. Then she said it was just words, that she didn't mean anything by it, that I was being too sensitive about something that happened almost a year ago. I hung up and blocked the number. Some people never change. They never develop the self-awareness to truly understand what they've done or why it matters. My mother will probably go to her grave believing she did nothing really wrong, that I overreacted, that I'm the one who broke the family by refusing to just accept how things were. But I know the truth. I broke free of a family that broke me first, slowly, over decades, through 1,000 small cruelties and dismissals that added up to a clear message. You don't matter as much as your sister. Now I'm building a life where I matter to myself, and that's enough. More than enough. I'm 33 now. I have a thriving career, financial security, and genuine peace for the first time in my adult life. I don't wake up with that familiar knot in my stomach wondering what family obligation I'll have to navigate or what dismissal I'll have to swallow. I just wake up and live my life, and it's remarkably simple. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or explosive. It's just living well, building something meaningful, and refusing to let people who hurt you maintain access to your peace. I'm done with my family, and I've never been more at peace with any decision in my life.